Okay, as you can see, my name's Alan Marques, so not the spelling that's up there. I'm a visual effects supervisor by profession. I don't know, does everybody know what a visual effects supervisor is? Does everybody know what the difference is between that and a special effects supervisor? Right.
Special effects are like explosions on set and water.
Correct, yeah. So special effects supervisor, and the terminology years ago was made up, and it used to be special effects was the same name used for what I did. But the gentleman there's correct. A special effects supervisor responsible for on-set or in-camera effects, which is everything from atmospherics through to big mechanical reels, stuff that has to happen in front of camera and reel. A visual effects supervisor is somebody who's responsible for producing imagery that basically just doesn't exist and has to be made up. And obviously, part of that process occurs on set, but the majority of what we then do is in post-production. So it's my responsibility to design visual effects for a particular program. Now, what I'm going to talk about, you probably saw the thing that says what a difference 10 years made. I'm going to briefly go through where we are, how we've got to today with technology, and then we're going to go through 3 shows that I've recently worked on and show you a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. But this is where I came from. I went to college in the 80s. It says London College of Printing, but in actual fact they did a film degree, film and television degree. Back then there were only 3 degree courses in the country for film. If you wanted to do film, that was it. There was no other alternatives. And of course there was no computer graphics courses at all back then. In '83 I left and started working for one of the first 3 computer graphics companies ever to set up in London. So I literally learned on the job over 9 years and saw the technology develop. Then in the early 90s I joined a company called Magic Camera Company down at Shepperton Film Studios. They were bought out by Mill Film, later on then shut down and stopped doing film. So they no longer exist. And while I was there I set up their digital facility and did about 14 feature films, some TV series. I was head of production of Pepper's Ghost for a year. They were doing television animation development for TV series. I then went freelance, worked with Pittis Camera Company on Martin Campbell's film Vertical Limit as a CD supervisor. I helped Art and Digital set up their motion capture facility. Unfortunately, they're no longer in business, so what our industry's like at times. I then ran my own company in Soho, a small company, boutique company called No Strings Attached, doing a lot of television graphics work like that. And then I kind of went, I had a business partner, and then in 2017 I went back to being freelance as an individual. In 2009 I joined a company called Darkside Animation Films, based over in Holborn. They do a lot of broadcast TV visual effects work and stuff for Discovery and History Channel. I was there until April of this year, and I'm now back being a freelance visual effects supervisor. So that's a brief biography, just to kind of show you what I do for a living. We all have to have show reels. This is mine. So here we go. If you see any strange artifacts, it's the projector. It's got a contrast issue with contrast borders. So if you see weird edging around things, it's not a bad comp. It's the projector. Shot at the old Black Rocket test site on the Isle of Wight where I live, which is where they used to, when we had the British space programme, this is where they tested the rocket engines. can see a name of films and various programs there. There's a reason behind this. It's just basically how technology is developed. We all remember Star Wars, a classic film. I was 17 when I went and saw it. There's a film called Last Starfighter made in 1984, which was the first attempt to do a fully CG film with visual effects. There's a lovely one here, which I'll show you in a moment, called Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity, which is as bad as it sounds. And then we have a couple of films, Space Marines Velocity Trap, released in the mid-90s. The film I obviously worked on, Lost in Space, and then Revenge of the Sith. And we're going to kick off with this.
In the distant future, there will still be slaves, helpless against the desires of their masters.
So miniature, bit of an old eagle there. Miniature. Motion control optical.
It's a big movie with big adventure, big action. What is this?
Crap dialogue. Crap robot. Crap monsters. Opticals. More opticals. Rostrum opticals.
Slave girls from beyond infinity.
Yeah. I have to own up to actually hiring this when it came out. I was living in Ilken Road from the local video store, so that's why I know it and remember it. Obviously, what's interesting about the film is it's 10 years after Star Wars. Star Wars obviously being big budget, so this is a B movie, C movie, whatever. And obviously back then there were no digital technology, no digital effects available. So the most they could afford on a film like that was about 30 shots. I know because I watched the film a long time ago and counted. That's how sad I am. So as you saw, miniatures, motion control optics is very expensive. If you want to do motion control, you have to build a miniature, you have to get a studio, lights, cameraman. It's expensive, it still is expensive. And then we jump forward 10 years to 97, thereabouts.
Federal carriers, once a target of criminal cartels, are now equipped with the Zircon Dominator 3600B pulse cannon turret gun. Self-targeting. 3,600 rounds per second, fully automated. The Dominator 3600B has put an end to space piracy. Zircon, bringing peace to a flawless universe.
So in 10 years, we've got to PC land. We've got to the fact that you can now use digital techniques. So this is a B movie, although this is a DVD sleeve you're seeing here. Obviously back then DVD was in infancy, so it was a straight video. But look at the shot count, 300 VFX shots, right, in a B movie, straight to television. So that's kind of what the technology's kind of done for us. I mean, Star Wars sort of had around 300 shots in it when it was first released. As you can see, Velocity Trap had 300. We had 780 on Lost in Space. And then by the time you get to 2005, you're over 2,000 shots for Revenge of the Sith. So it's amazing how the technology has moved on. In '97, when I was running Magic Camera Digital, this is what I had to spend for a workstation. There's a 2D one on the left and a 3D one on the right. The bottom line figure down the bottom is the entertainment value. If I wanted to put an artist in front of a machine, that's what had to be paid. Typically, funny enough, students went the first call sitting in front of one of these machines on shops. notice the RAID, £36,000 for 6 gigabytes. You can't even buy a hard drive that small anymore. It was the size of a small fridge. We jumped forward to 2007. Back in 2007, you know, the price of a workstation was down to £2.5 grand. Way more powerful than those silicon graphics. Hard drives, 512 gig for £150. Solid, a standard definition broadcast disc recorder down to £3,500. And you can see the overall cost at the bottom. By the time you add in software and stuff, you're down to about £8 grand for a workstation. And now, as of today, I can get a machine for £1,000 with a really good graphics card in it if I put it together myself. And a terabyte drive is 65 quid. And you don't really need a disc recorder anymore. It says here, uncompressed HD, ask Dave. I think I saw Dave in the audience. This laptop, which Dave sorted for me when I was out in South Africa, can actually now record uncompressed full HD 422-bit video 8-bit into this laptop. It's got a solid state drive in it, so there's a trick to it. Dave knows how to do it. If you want one, ask him. So you can actually now record onto pretty much anything. You don't need big, expensive systems. And keep in mind, just one last thing, the last Starfighter in 1984 was done on a Cray XMP supercomputer, $21 million, came with its own water cooling tower. And just over 10 years later, an Amiga computer, you know, won an Emmy for Babylon 5 Pilot. Amiga actually outperform, outrender, and outquality a supercomputer of about 12, 13 years earlier. So, fairly impressive scaling of technology that we've all seen. Right, let's kick off with the first show that I worked on recently. This is Mission 2110. It was done for BBC Scotland. It was a children's game show, kind of a sort of challenge series. This is the concept art for the robots that appear in it. This concept art's actually done by a good friend of mine in the industry, Paul Catling. And this shows you where we were shooting, very unusual film location. This is 6 container ships in Lochstriven in Scotland that Maersk Shipping had mothballed for the recession. So they have a skeleton crew and they're just literally just moored there. BBC Scotland did a deal to actually put the show on it. For all you students, any students here? No? Yeah? Okay, this is the glamour of the film industry. Right, this is freezing, it's Scotland in winter. So apart from spinal compression from earlier on when we were coming out of the main waters, this is kind of some of the things you have to endure as a supervisor. So it's not all glamour. So this is how we got on board. And in a moment you'll see Captain Dave, who's the skipper who's looking after the raft. It's called a raft apparently, that's what you call a bunch of ships tied together.
The vaporizer, which actually is sometimes...
This is the producer Nick Hopkin. We're inside the ship
To
today.
enable it to zap kids from 2010 to 2110. You with us? I was just directly above James' head. Now we come down here. So I'm trying to make it easy.
This is a tech recce.
We're not in a bonkers location, but we're trying to make it easy.
Bonkers location, absolutely correct. They had to ship all the games over and take them down into the holds, which you'll see in a moment. It's kind of a bit of a feat of engineering and stuff. Now, this isn't our cameraman. This is but this is the helicopter we use for the helicopter shoot. Our cameraman was a guy called Adam Rogers, who was actually what's called the mini cam operator. He was responsible on the main shoot for all the little micro cameras that are all over the place that back up the main cameras. But he's also a qualified helicopter aerial pilot, aerial cinematographer. So my first tip with a helicopter shoot is if somebody tells you to put thermals on in a Scottish winter, you're in a helicopter with no door on for 2 hours, right? No door. And I'm actually in the seat next to the pilot. The cameraman has to sit there for the entire flight. So if somebody says wear thermals, double it, whatever you decide to wear, because it's never enough. You saw some of the shots we took earlier. We did a lot of shooting. This is the deck of what's called the SLP, which is one of the ships in the raft. One of the games that was ultimately actually played on this deck. This is the view from the bridge down onto the deck. I mean, they're huge ships, and until you actually get on them, you don't really appreciate how big they are. And they actually stand out of the water 10 stories when they're not fully laden. So you have to climb up 10 stories just to get in them when they're empty. And then big inside as they're out. So a lot of people see container ships and they see containers stacked on them. A lot of people don't realise the containers also in them. This is one of the container bays. You can see how deep it is, and you can also see on the right one of the just showing how the robots would sit in this environment. So all the games were brought into these holds, and they also did a lot of shooting in the engine rooms and various areas on the ships. There were, of course, real robots. They had to have them to interact with the kids. These were done by a company called Millennium FX, good friends of mine. I've known them for years. If you don't know who Millennium FX are, they are a prosthetics, animatronics, practical effects company. And I'll just say Doctor Who. They do Doctor Who, among other things, so they've won quite a lot of awards. The robots you can see being tested here. We also took a lot of CG reference once they were painted and ready. We went up there, this is one of my crew from Darkside, and we took just a hell of a lot of photographs of the robots, basically so that we could build a CG version of them for the shots that they wanted on the decks of the ships. This is some shot footage we shot where they're trying to learn how to walk in them. Their main workshop where they're getting ready to dress some of the, you can see the performer on the right hand side there, and obviously all of this had to be done on the ship on a daily basis. They had to get in and out of these costumes. There were 3 of them constructed. They were all silver, but they had different coloured panels that were magnetic and could be clipped on, so they had worker robots, a kind of military robot, and these ones which were the general kind of silver robots. So as I said, we went up there, this is Marques, the janitor from Darkside, and we just literally took all the bits and we just took lots of photographs. We didn't scan because being a BBC production, money's tight. So you mentioned the word laser scanner and they go, oh, can't have that. So this is one of Ben Beckett, one of the lead animators, doing the thing that you do, which you need to learn when you become an animator, which is to, do the performance. This is some footage from the mini cams that Adam set up. So this is one of the very early kind of gaming tests showing the real robot doing its thing. So, the Disto, for some people who don't know, is a laser rangefinder. They're very popular in the film and TV industry. They're made by a company called Leica, the most well-known ones. They're a handheld laser rangefinder. They're great for taking long distance measurements, but even under those circumstances, they don't always work. They do work out of doors, but they all have limits on how far the laser can go and actually be received by the receiver on the device you're holding. And when you get into hot sunlight or a certain distance, you're not going to get used to measurements. So when you're putting CG into shots like, say this, where we were shooting for the bridge, you need to kind of find ways of knowing where the camera was. And sometimes you can't use normal match moving techniques. And even if you do match move the camera and you get a good solution, you still need to know how big all the real world objects are out there and what size everything is. So we took a lot of measurements of the deck plates down there, but we had to fall back on some good old photographic data. Most of these ships we discovered had plans of all the vessels on all the walls. So basically what I did as a backup was I did lots of photographic tiles at high resolution of these plans and stitched them together. And they're very accurate. And there's a nice feature in Photoshop which allows you to take measurements, and you can actually drag out a ruler and say this number of pixels is a meter. And then from then on, whenever you drag a new ruler out, it'll give you a measurement in meters. So you can actually do measurements off bitmap images and get very accurate placements of where you are. And that's kind of, we use that technique quite a lot on this show to kind of find out where these cameras were, because they were sometimes at quite extreme heights and positions. We did 3 different sets of plates for the CG. We shot from boats, we shot on the decks, of course, which you saw some of my showreel, and we shot from the helicopter. So this is kind of a little sort of medley of stuff that we shot. So this is a big 360 or 180 pan on the deck of the SLP. The robots were originally built in Lightwave, Darkside, historically a white Lightwave house, but because of the nature of the animation, how many robots we had to do, we bought 5 Softimage licenses and moved all the data into Softimage so that we're able to take advantage of the non-linear animation, clip-based animation facilities. So we basically built up a library of motion clips, just like games companies do, and these were then laid out onto the characters. And the whole lot was rendered multi-pass in Mental Ray, and then composited in After Effects. The match moving, 90% of the match moving was done in Synthesize, which is one of my favourite cheap match movers. For people who haven't come across it, it's about $400. It's not a lot. It's a great product. A lot of big houses actually use it, even though it's very cheap. But all of this stuff you're seeing here was match moved using Synthesize to get the 3D camera data. How are we doing? Not too bad. Right, the next show I worked on in Dark's Animation. Excuse me, that. Was a show called Outcasts. Now this was produced by Kudos, Film and Television for the BBC. It was on broadcast earlier this year, starting in February. I don't know if I'm jinxed or something, but Mission 2110 did 2 seasons and they cancelled it, even though it then went on to win awards in Scotland. Outcast did 1 season and got cancelled by the BBC, so I'm just waiting for the next show that I do, just get cancelled. In fact, I'll be showing you some Spooks, and of course I finally get onto Spooks, and it's the last series. So, something I said, I don't know. Anyway, really nice show, Outcasts. It was different. But it was amazing shooting location. My wife often acts as my VFX assistant. She's done it for many years, and we were out in South Africa for 4.5 months on this show. And if I run this clip for you, I'll just show you some stats. It was shot in Western Cape, South Africa. We were pretty much about an hour out of Cape Town, and all our locations were within about an hour to an hour and a half drive of our unit base. We shot from May to August 2010, and which is actually the South African winter. So I just come from winter in England, November 2009 with snow. We went out at the very end of the South African summer, my wife and I. Admittedly, it was very hot. When I landed in the aircraft, it was 40 degrees, and my wife was taken straight from the airport to a boutique hotel with a spa and a swimming pool, and I was taken straight to sand dunes, 40-degree heat for a recce. So I don't even go to a hotel. Anyway, we ended up shooting straight into the South African winter, and then we came back in September to start another winter in the UK. So Linda and I had a 1.5 years of winters, so a bit sick of that, but there you go. Our post-production, as you can see, went August to February, from 2010 into 2011, and at a maximum we had about 16 people on our post-crew, Dark Side. There were 8 episodes, and we turned out 303 visual effects shots over that period. There was another company that did spillover shots, some of the less complex stuff, called The Farm, because there was so much in the show that we couldn't handle it all. So I think over total, it's probably about 400 shots in the show. I've shown you that shot is not a VFX shot, but it does show you how amazing the countryside in South Africa is. And while they were shooting that, which is one of the leads, I took this photograph from higher ground. So that's the actual shoot crew down there on the left. And we shot it at sunrise over the mountain range in the distance. So it was, we definitely enjoyed the photography, I have to say. When we were out there, it was absolutely stunning. And if you ever get a chance to visit Western Cape area, I can highly recommend it. And to follow on, here's another one. There's actually a shot in the very first episode of J.B. Bamber walking through the metal gates of Thorhaven with this behind him. He was lucky. It's a natural weather phenomenon. It doesn't happen very often, but basically, if you saw this on film, literally it's like a waterfall. Vapours just pouring down the mountain right from the background. Quite stunning. One of the early things we shot was a shuttle crash. So here we are in Atlantis Dunes. This was the place I was whisked off to when I got off the plane about a month earlier. And the art department built this full-size prop. You can see the shoot crew there, and we spent a couple of days shooting Atlantis Dunes. One of the things I don't have a picture of here, which is you really do feel for people, is the people who had to clean the sand. We had a batch of people with brooms who had to go around removing footprints every time you walked in to set stuff up. So you were there with like 5 people with brooms having to kind of work backwards, get out of the shot. On film, this is the shot, the opening shot. So obviously we've put the moon in, fairly straightforward 2D tracking shot. This is what the director Barrett Naluri referred to as his Star Wars shot. It was rather nice. But then classically, he went into classically you do, and this is the type of thing that VFX supervisors often run into. You'll see there's a ridge on the right-hand side there. He then decided to shoot from the ridge back at the prop, the set piece, and the art bomb didn't build the back of it because they didn't think they would shoot the back of it. So you can see there's a bit missing. Not only that, but we can now see off the dunes into the green grass that precedes the sea. And we have the smoke going across the split line. So we then had to fix all of that, and fix the back of the shuttle, and fix the smoke, and make sure the dunes were cloned off. So that's one of the things you always run into as a supervisor is basically you get thrown wide balls all the time, curveballs. The next main site we shot from was this place called Lawrenceford Ridge. This is on the Lawrenceford wine estates. Anybody who likes a glass of wine, South Africa has got a lot of wine estates. We were a bit gutted, my wife and I, to discover we were staying in Stellenbosch, which is the heart of the wine region. So we were surrounded by vineyards. Terrible. This Lawrenceford wine estate, to get to this location, which is where those mountain ranges that you just saw where, it took 20 minutes to drive to this location from the gate of the wine estate. That's how much land people own out there. We did a lot of crane shoots from up here. This is the view back at Fort Haven, or the area that will become Fort Haven. If you look down there in the dark area of the trees, you'll see a kind of white patch. That is the gate of Fort Haven. It's made out of containers. You'll see in a moment. A lot of shots were done from this ridge, looking back down here. And here's a little medley of shots we did. The Fort Haven was done as a 3D computer model in Lightwave. It was done as a 3D computer model because we actually had to look at it from a number of angles, and because we couldn't, guarantee there weren't going to be too many angles. Doing it as a matte painting in the traditional sense, i.e. painted, meant every time we moved the camera we'd have to do a new painting. So the decision was made to make a large model, texture it, and treat it very much like architectural viz basically, and situate in the environment. Now, again, even though we were out in South Africa being a PBC-backed project, money was again an issue. So, surprise, surprise, we couldn't afford to buy the height field data. The ideal thing to put Fort Haven on the topology of the landscape would be to buy satellite height field data. But just to buy the data of this area commercially would cost £20,000 for the data per meter. So, not £20,000 per meter, but it's done at meter accuracy. So we had to go with the full brute force approach, which was to go to the South African equivalent of the Ordnance Survey, to their mapping institute, and we just bought all the maps of the area. And some poor suckers at Darkside got to digitise them into the computer, all of the height data. So we built kind of base topology of the landscape so that we could form fit the CG model over it. So as one of the things as a supervisor you often run into is technical issues. You always see people talking about how things should be done, and you probably have seen lots of training videos on how things should be done. But in the real world, it never quite works that way, and you always have to find compromises. Now, how many people here know what a light probe is, know what high dynamic range imagery is? Yeah, so people taking like HDRs and stuff, how it's done? Right. Light probes are great because they give you natural lighting from the environment you're in. But when you're standing on a ridge at Lawrenceford looking at the thing you're putting in and it's over 1 kilometre away, you aren't going to be popping over there to get a light probe. Okay? Not only that, even if you do, as we discovered, there are clouds scudding across the sky. So 1 minute of the shoot you're in sunlight going across, and the next minute you're in cloud. So trying to take light probes is a very hit and miss affair, so you have to kind of always think on your feet and cover for it. And things that always teach you, hopefully, is getting camera data. And apart from the usual stuff like tilt, you know, height, all that stuff. The most important thing when you can't get HDR data is to know the time of day, your GPS location, and the direction to north of the camera. Because anywhere in the world, a lot of computer graphics systems have time of day systems in them. Certainly 3ds Max does, which is one of my favorites. And you can literally just type in all the data and it will position the sun for you. So all you then need is a lighting reference to know whether it was overcast or whether it's broad daylight. You can do that with a straight camera. So, little tips there, always restrictions, always find restrictions. This is the Fort Haven gate site. We're now come down from the ridge. We did a lot of shooting around here. This is basically, you know, the gates of Fort Haven. Behind here will be the entire settlement. As you can see, the art department, this is all that was constructed of it. On this particular day, we had a green screen set up on the right-hand side. This is the same sort of location, this is the same Fort Haven gate, but this time we're at a completely different location in South Africa, Tembalatu. This is where they had the big outdoor set, all the buildings and exteriors. And it's also where they had this thing called the XP base, which is where the expeditionaries were. And if you looked out of this gate all you saw was the rest of the backs of the set out there, and obviously you wouldn't see the lovely environment that you'd like to see, because what you really would like to see is this. This is what you see when you turn around at the gate site at Lawrenceville and look back at the ridge. So it's very common in TV, you have to join two places together. You're shooting two completely different locations, and you need to seamlessly join them editorially. So here we put a green screen up at the Tembalatu site behind the gate. This is for a shot with Liam Cunningham, who's walking out of Fort Haven. And here's some more tips. You can never take enough stills when you're on a shoot. I had a venerable Canon 40D, which was one of my company's cameras. Between my wife and myself, we took 8,500 stills over 4.5 months. Now, obviously a lot will be HDRs, which are bracketed anyway, but even so, we still took 8,500 stills. Always shoot stuff even if you don't need it. Good case in point, I shot a panorama out of the Fort Haven gates during the first episode, and the director said, I want to shoot out these gates in the 8th or the 7th episode. There was nobody was intending to shoot that way. It wasn't written in any of the scripts. So literally a number of months later, this photograph I'd taken, which is a stitched high-resolution tile image, kind of came into service when the director said, I now want to shoot back out this way. So we shot this at Tembalatu. Comp was then done in New. Basically what you're seeing here is you saw the motion on the ground there. The still is projected onto 3D surface geometry, so you get perspective shift, parallax shift, so as the camera's moving out on the live action with the match move, the actual background plate has dimensionality to it too, so even though it started live as a still, it's actually been projected onto a curved surface with a full ground plane. For those who want to be supervisors, here's some sage supervisor advice. When I turned up on Spooks, which you'll see later on, the director said, we thought we might need a green screen, so I got to bring one. Unfortunately, he had asked for the wrong green screen. If you ask for a normal green screen, they'll send you out what's often called a studio green screen, and it's no good outdoors. It's too bright. You know, the DOP will hate you, and you just can't work with it. You can't. When you're out of doors, you can't take light away. If the sun's there, you're kind of screwed. However, there's a company called Bristol Paints, I'm in Bristol, funny enough, who make a particular green called Deep Optic. I had some of this shipped out to South Africa for the shoot, and it works great for exteriors. It needs to be in the shade. You can't even with this green, you can't have full sun falling on it. You have to angle the screen so it's in shade. If you have to shoot in full sun, then you use blue screen. Blue is a lot darker as a colour, and you can actually let the sun fall on it, and it'll expose out nicely in broad sun. If you haven't got all the expensive gadgets, try and take a good smartphone with you. They're great. I had an iPhone when I was out there. They've got GPS, they've got compasses, they've got inclinometers for getting the camera angle. And if you get apps, you can get apps that will actually track the time of the sun across the sky, and it will tell you when to shout at the crew or the director in a nice way that they're going to lose the light on the screen, or the sun's going to come around too far on the screen and we can't shoot, because basically the screen's blown out. So lots of very useful apps out there that help cinematographers and photographers. This is a blue screen that was set up for one of the shots of Storm. Again, you can see it out there with the just about see the actors in front of it. We shot on Arri D21s, by the way, digital cameras. And this is the actual shot as it turned up in the final show. The reason this was done this way was because the whole thing, we had to put a matte painting behind the character and make it look like a big dust storm had gone through, so it all had to look very dusty with the grade and everything. So again, that was a shot blue screen. As I said, green screen. This was one of the setups. We did the other stuff we did at Forethaven, apart from shooting on the ridge, looking down at the settlement from outside. We had an episode in episode 4 where we had to chase over the rooftops of the settlement. So we then had to use the same computer models. This is like where the decision to make a computer model of Forethaven kind of worked, because they then later wrote in, you know, the fact they wanted to kind of run around the rooftops, which suddenly meant that we had to be able to position our cameras within the, you know, the digital model to get much tighter shots. You may have seen shot in my showroom where Amy Manson's running across the top of the container and jumps. This is the setup for that. This is the down angle. This is the awning she jumped down onto, so you can see there's a green screen beneath as well. Well, a lot of the time we're shooting with 2 cameras. You can't just think, oh, we're going to shoot one way. Often you have to put multiple screens up because they're going to have a camera this way and a camera that way. Case in point, here's another one, 2 camera shoot. So there's a green screen on the ground. Amy Manson was pretty much up for anything. This is the actual actress, quite happy to be wired and do this particular stunt. Obviously she wasn't a safety harness, but quite, you know, impressed she did it. There is a big crash mount underneath the green screen at the bottom, you would have to know. So. And this is a breakdown of the shot, just to give you an idea of what it ended up looking like. So again, this is a kind of a lightweight model. We used a number of compositors on the show, including its own composite, which is very good at handling OpenEXR. Pretty much everything was rendered OpenEXR as far as the CG element was concerned. Okay, here's another thing that you often run into as a supervisor. This is Coble Bay, stunning place, one of the places we shot for episode 5. This is the actual actor, he dies in the episode. And there was 4 blocks. They shot the show in what's called blocks, so each do 2 episodes at a time, and they give 2 episodes to a director. So there were 4 directors, 4 blocks. Out of the 4 directors, only one of them ever managed to finish his shoot schedule on a daily basis on time. In fact, Jamie Payne, who was the last operator, finished early. But everybody else ran over every time, or ran out of shoot time. And this was a day where we ran out of shoot time. The sun was going down, you can't stop it going down. And we were supposed to do a shot of Danny Mays and Amy Manson sitting on the beach with, what's his name? I can't remember. Gary. With Gary lying on the ground dead in front of them. And it's an over-the-shoulder shot. And they ran out of time, didn't shoot it. So what you do is you go to the art department, you say, can you make me a bit of beach at Lawrenceford? So we're back up at Lawrenceford shooting on another day, a different scene, and the art department made a bit of beach, and we put the green screen up, which you can see is in the shade, and we shot this, which is the shot that they wanted against green screen. And we then have the usual typical VFX fun. I go to the line producer and I need the background plate for this, because obviously, you know, we shot at Coble Bay and that's now it's now a visual effects shot. It was never intended to be. So I need a C plate, I need the plate to go behind me. So I used to go to the line producer each week and say, when can I have an Arri D21 to go back to Coble Bay? And she'd say, not this week. So we get to the last week of the shoot before we come back to the UK, and she said, not this week. So now I had my Canon D40 with me, which sadly, or 40D, sadly predates being able to do video. And although I had a little camcorder, HD camcorder with me, it wasn't really suitable because of the resolution. Even though it was HD, it wasn't good enough to shoot plates. But I noticed the line producer's husband, who was basically house husband during the shoot, during the time out there. Had a 550 Canon with him, which did shoot video. So I said, well, you know, persuade your husband to lend me the camera. So we literally just turned up one day, same time of day, found a weather forecast, got to the same time of day. I had all the camera data. I knew how high the camera was off the ground, the angle, everything. The only downside of the 550D, this is what it looks like, was that it didn't have the swivel screen like the 60D does. So I had to lie on my stomach on a wet beach because the camera's like that, and of course the camera's on the ground. So literally the camera was like this far high off the beach, which meant to actually see the back of the camera and see the viewfinder, or more importantly, see the LCD. I was literally lying on my stomach taking this. Anyway, it worked, and it went in the show. And there it is. So sometimes you have to think on your feet. You know, when you aren't given the things you need, you have to have a backup plan. My backup plan next time is I'm going to buy a better stills camera that can shoot video. Isn't Canon announcing something on the 3rd of November? I want to know what it is. Big announcement in Hollywood. Is it a new high-res video camera? Right, how are we doing? Not too bad, 10-2. Should be wrapping up soon, but I'll push it a bit, unless everybody's bored. Okay, obviously being a sci-fi show, has to have spaceships. They're certainly in the show, and you saw the opening shot on my show reel. Here's a medley of shots we put together. The spaceships were done in Lightwave, very big model, took about 3 months to complete it, along with the front end which separates, which is the actual landing part of the configuration, the transporter itself, CT. This is CT9, when it arrives at the beginning of the first episode. This just shows you one of the breakdowns of some of the passes used to make up the ship. So obviously we've got various beauty passes, specular passes, ambient occlusion passes. So these are all separate OpenE and XR renders. Everything comes into the compositing package. Lots of nice things like lens flares are added to the director. We were shooting anamorphic, even though the BBC finally said actually we don't want anamorphic. You know, it's going to be 16:9. But we had the ARRI D21 cameras working in what's called M-scope mode, which means they shoot 235, beautiful widescreen like cinema. So all our visual effects had to be done in 235 because otherwise none of your matchmaking works. You have to actually work with the original plate information, unadulterated. Sadly, what you see in the show is 16:9 like this, which is a bit of a shame. But lots of anamorphic lens flares. We had to match the ones on the real cameras. So yeah, the director always wanted nice flares, so no shortage of those. So that's some of the shots that we did for the show on the space stuff. This is one of the shots on the ground of the whiteout at the end of episode 3 as it hits the CT transport in Fort Haven, which is one of the ones that's previously landed. Again, you can see how the build. This is a full CG shot, again done in Lightwave. The storm's done with a thing called hypervoxels. My God, what a pain that was. The render times, it's an old technology in Lightwave for volumetric rendering, ray marching. We hit 429 hours a frame on some of on the shots when they got right onto the camera. On Spooks, I used a different technology, which I'll tell you about shortly, done way faster. Still a nice shot, but a bit painful kind of getting there on stuff like this. And finally had a clown impersonator. This is Jamie Payne, the fat bloke, with the photograph of me. We had to do, Jamie wanted a shot of there's a number of doppelganger shots in the later shows with Preston Tate, and he sees a duplicate of himself, which is an alien. And Jamie was very keen, but I'll let this speak for itself. This was made by the BBC behind the scenes crew. Hopefully it's loud, but my name's Mark. Normally on TV that was a shot, as you saw, that was done by using a camera track because we couldn't afford motion control. So we had a very good camera and grips out in South Africa. And because you couldn't see the feet on the ground, the chances of the eye picking up on the slippage between the two planes was a lot reduced. So by just doing a very careful double take of the same setup, one with the green screen that was being moved around behind the actor, we were able to combine the two, and we could deal with the timing discrepancies using what's called retiming software. Right.
Right. Okay, sorry. That's it.
Is that right?
No, no.
What do you want to throw us out?
No, don't wait. 2 or 3 minutes. So.
Yeah, we'll rush. Right, here we go. Spooks! Last week for Spooks, we had to blow up the home secondary, or try to. So we went up into London in June, we shot at the city. For various reasons, they couldn't use real pyros, probably because they were in the city. So we had this van bomb, and basically we had to shoot the whole sequence without any kind of practical work at all.